Zoe Hayes had already spent the half-guinea, already crossed the city in a plain brown cloak that smelled of wet wool and carriage soot, and already brought a man she had never seen before through the servants' entrance of Hayes' house by the time the first dinner bell rang. The kitchen passage was warm with steam and yeast, bright with copper pans, and lined with people who had learned to look past the unmarried daughter when Lady Hayes wished her unseen. Tonight, they did not quite manage it. Their glances moved from Zoe's uncovered hair to the stranger's worn seacoat, then back to her face. No one spoke. The cook bent her head over the pastry board with deliberate concentration, as if flour required all her attention. "Up the back stair," Zoe said quietly. The man nodded once and followed her. He moved with the economy of someone used to narrow decks and low ceilings, one hand brushing the banister without leaning on it. He had introduced himself in the arcade off Fleet Market as Mr. Ash. He had accepted half her payment and no questions. That had seemed, at the time, a mercy. At the first landing, she stopped before the old schoolroom door, now used for stored trunks and broken cane chairs. "You will remain here until I send for you," she said. "I require you at 7, no earlier. You are to answer only what I ask, and you are to remember the particulars I gave you. We were married quietly in Portsmouth. You have returned from service with little money and less patience for society. You are polite to my mother and indifferent to Lord Brimley." He watched her with a stillness that unsettled her. His eyes were grey, not pale, but iron dark at the centre, as if light did not pass through them so much as strike and stop. "I remember," he said. His voice held no mockery, no curiosity, no hunger for gossip. It was measured, almost official. She disliked that she found it reassuring. "I have one more condition," Zoe said. "Whatever Lady Hayes says tonight, you will not raise your voice in this house." "Very well. Even if she insults you." A brief pause. "I am familiar with insult." He said it as fact, not complaint. She opened the schoolroom and stepped aside. The air inside carried old chalk, dry wood, and the faint medicinal odour of lavender sachets gone stale. She set a small lamp on the desk, placed a covered tray beside it, and handed him a folded sheet with names and kinships written in her neat account hand. "If anyone asks," she said, "you are waiting for me to summon you because you have no proper coat for the dining room." His mouth shifted, not yet a smile. "That part, at least, is true." She closed the door before she could answer. By the time she reached the family corridor, the house had resumed its polished rhythm, silver being laid, a maid carrying warmed plates in linen, the butler consulting the French clock above the hall table. Everything in its place. Every person where Lenora Hayes had decided they belonged. Zoe removed her cloak, gave it to a footman, and crossed to the blue drawing-room as though she had merely taken the air. Her mother stood before the mantel in black silk and jet beads, immaculate as ledger ink, her profile cut clean against the firelight. Lenora did not turn at once. She finished reading the card in her hand, set it on the marble shelf, and only then looked at her daughter. "You are late," she said. "I was out." "You were not invited out." Zoe felt the old reflex tighten her throat, that trained instinct to explain every step. She did not feed it. "I have returned," she said. Lenora's gaze moved over her gown, paused at the hem where one drop of street mud had dried to brown dust, and returned to Zoe's face. "Lord Brimley will join us in 20 minutes. You will receive him with civility. You will not speak of shipping contracts, freight rates, or company voting procedures. Men do not enjoy a lecture with their soup." The line might have stung less if it were new. It was an old tune played nightly in different keys. "I understand," Zoe said. "Do you?" Lenora lifted one brow. This household has not been managed by sentiment since your father died. You are 26. You have no brothers. Your dowry is not inexhaustible. You will marry where your interests are best secured. Where your interests are best secured. Lenora always used the language of prudence when she meant obedience. On the escritoire near the window sat 3 opened letters tied with Zoe's green ribbon. Her correspondence had been delivered an hour earlier. The knife cuts were neat, precise. Even violation here was orderly. Zoe crossed the room and lifted the top page. It was from Mrs. Ellery, her former music tutor, declining with regret to resume lessons after the unfortunate misunderstanding concerning payment. Zoe had paid Mrs. Ellery from her own allowance, discreetly, for years. Last week the allowance had vanished from her account book with no notation. That letter was addressed to me, Zoe said. Lenora selected a fan from the side table and unfolded it with a soft crack of ivory. All letters in this house concern this house. That is not law. It is my rule. Zoe set the letter down. Her fingers remained steady only because she pressed them against the desk edge until the knuckles cooled. 3 mornings earlier, she had gone to the breakfast room to find her father's leather-bound shipping ledgers, removed from the sideboard shelf and replaced by an arrangement of peonies that made the room smell sweet enough to turn her stomach. When she asked where the books had gone, Lenora had buttered her toast and said, without looking up, "You mistake curiosity for authority." Yesterday, in the small music parlour, the pianoforte had been shut and covered. Mrs. Ellery's chair was gone. A maid informed Zoe that lessons had been discontinued as wasteful. Wasteful, as if discipline could be measured like candle wax. At luncheon today, with 2 distant cousins present, Lenora had asked whether Zoe preferred cream or lemon in her tea, then answered for her before she could speak. "Lemon," she told the footman. "My daughter is learning restraint." It was never one cruelty. It was the arrangement of many, each minor enough to deny, together sufficient to erase a person in her own home. A knock sounded at the drawing-room door. Hawthorne, the butler, entered with a silver salver and another card. "Lord Brimley has arrived, my lady." Lenora's mouth softened by a degree that would have passed for warmth in any other woman. "Show him in." She turned to Zoe as Hawthorne withdrew. "Remember yourself." Zoe almost laughed. Remember yourself, as if she had been permitted a self to remember. Lord Brimley entered with the confidence of a man who had never doubted any door would open to him. He was broad-shouldered, well-barbered, expensively scented, and possessed of the mild expression men cultivated when they expected gratitude for tolerating a bargain. He bowed first to Lenora, then to Zoe, lower, but not by much. "Miss Hayes," he said, "you are very punctual this evening." "I am in my own house, Lord Brimley." A flicker crossed his face, quickly smoothed. He took the chair Lenora indicated and accepted sherry. Conversation began where it had ended last week and the week before, with horseflesh, Parliament rumours, and a Kent property adjacent to one of Hayes Shipping's warehouses. Zoe sat with her hands folded in her lap and listened while 2 people discussed her future as if deciding where to place a sideboard. "The contracts will be simple," Brimley said at last, setting down his glass. "I prefer efficiency. Affection may grow after signatures. If it does not, signatures remain." Lenora inclined her head. "A practical view." Zoe kept her eyes on the rim of her untouched glass. The same sentence, nearly word for word, had reached her through the walnut study door that afternoon, when she passed the corridor with an account statement in hand. She had paused because she heard her name. Inside, Lenora's voice had been flat, bored, almost tired. "Affection is irrelevant. Signatures are what secure a daughter. A male voice had answered, amused. "Then we are agreed." Zoe had stood in the dim corridor with the account sheet trembling once between her fingers. Just once. Then she had gone upstairs, removed the small lockbox from the back of her wardrobe, counted out half a guinea and 6 shillings, packed one plain cloak, and walked out through the side gate before anyone thought to ask where she was going. Now she listened to Brimley discuss settlement dates and trustees. He did not ask her a single question. When Lenora rose for dinner, the men followed. In the hall, beneath the portrait of her father with one hand on a ship's rail and salt wind painted into his hair, Zoe stopped. "I will join you directly," she said. Lenora turned. "No." The single word carried a warning sharpened by years. Zoe met her mother's eyes and waited. Brimley adjusted his cuffs, politely impatient. "Directly," Zoe repeated. For a moment, Lenora seemed to calculate whether a scene in front of Brimley was worth the cost. She decided it was not. "Do not be theatrical," she said, and continued toward the dining room. Zoe did not move until their footsteps had faded. Then she turned and took the service stair 2 at a time, her pulse loud in her ears, candlelight jumping across the panelled walls. At the top landing, she paused outside the old schoolroom, smoothed her sleeves, and opened the door. Mr. Ashe stood where she had left him, reading the kinship sheet by lamplight with the concentration of a man reviewing orders before battle. He looked up as she entered and folded the paper once, precisely. "It is time," she said. He took his hat from the chair and came toward her. In the narrow corridor, his presence altered the air not by force, but by certainty, as though he had stepped into a role he already understood better than she did. Zoe led him down the back stair toward the glow and clatter of the dining room, toward her mother's arranged future, and toward whatever this ruinous practical decision would cost her before the night ended. Zoe led him through the narrow service passage and into the shadow behind the dining room screen, where footmen waited with covered dishes, and the smell of roasted partridge hung heavy under the beeswax and polished silver. Through the carved opening she could see the table laid in Lenora's preferred geometry. 12 places, though only 4 were occupied, crystal spaced exactly 2 finger widths from each charger. Candles staggered so the light favoured the head of the table and left the far end in softer dark. Her place, always, was 3 seats down on the left, close enough to be corrected, far enough to be ignored. "Do not speak until I address you," she said under her breath, still facing the screen. "I understand." His voice remained low and even, carrying no strain despite the attention that would fall on him the moment they stepped through. It should have unsettled her more than it did. She had expected a man eager for performance, eager for coin, eager to turn a household quarrel into theatre. Instead, she had hired someone who observed. She could feel that observation now. It did not pry, it measured. Hawthorne appeared at the edge of the screen with his customary neutrality, though one blink landed too slowly when he saw the stranger beside her. "Miss Hayes," he said, then corrected himself after the smallest pause. "The first course is prepared." "Announce me when I enter," Zoe said, "and announce Mr. Ashe with me." Hawthorne's eyes moved once to the worn cuff of the seacoat. "As you wish, miss." Lenora had trained this house with the same principles she used in business. No raised voices, no visible uncertainty, and no private loyalty that outranked her own. It had taken years, but she had accomplished it. The maids carried her keys on separate rings, so no one hand could open every cabinet. The correspondence tray sat outside her dressing room each morning before 8, and no letter reached Zoe unopened. Household expenditures required 2 signatures, neither of them Zoe's, even for candles in her own chamber. Her father's ledgers had vanished from her reach as cleanly as if they had dissolved. At breakfast, there was always one extra witness at the table, a cousin or curate or solicitor's wife, someone to absorb and repeat whatever version of Zoe's behaviour Lenora wished London to hear. The cruelty was never dramatic. It was administrative. Hawthorne stepped into the room, staff striking once on the floor. Miss Zoe Hayes, Mr. Ashe. Conversation cut off as if trimmed with scissors. Brimley, already seated opposite Lenora, half rose in confusion before settling back, his mouth flattening with irritation at being forced to wait for explanation. Lenora did not stand. She turned her head and looked from Zoe to the man beside her, taking in every visible fact with practiced speed. Coat too plain, boots cleaned but old, posture military, gaze direct. "Zoe," she said, "explain." Zoe walked forward, feeling the weight of all three gazes and the silent attention of staff along the walls. She kept her shoulders level and stopped behind the chair that should have been hers. "This is Mr. Ashe," she said. "He will dine with us." Brimley gave a short, disbelieving breath. "On what authority?" "On mine," Zoe said, and sat. Mr. Ashe took the seat to her right without waiting for invitation. Not insolent, simply resolved, as if place and timing had already been decided elsewhere. A footman faltered with the soup ladle, recovered and served in order. Lenora did not touch her spoon. "You have embarrassed this house," Lenora said. Zoe unfolded her napkin with steady fingers. "That would depend on whether this house is improved by silence." Brimley turned to Lenora rather than to Zoe, a habit he had already formed. "If Miss Hayes intends to continue in this spirit, I shall have to reconsider the generosity of my terms." "You may reconsider whatever pleases you," Zoe said. Lenora's fan remained closed against the table. "You were instructed to receive Lord Brimley with civility." "I am civil?" "Then dismiss this man." "No." The single syllable landed between courses, between breaths, between the 1,000 prior evenings when she had answered yes. Hawthorne's expression did not change, but she saw him lower his eyes to hide that he had heard the difference. Lenora turned at last to Mr. Ashe. "You have entered a private family dinner under false pretenses. Name your employment and state who paid you." Zoe felt the instant he could have betrayed her for easy safety. Half a guinea for an evening's trouble was one thing. Lenora Hayes's displeasure was another. She placed her spoon down beside her untouched soup and prepared to absorb whatever came next. He looked at Lenora first, then at Brimley, then at Zoe. His eyes in candlelight were darker than before, steel under smoke. "Mrs. Hayes requested my presence," he said. Brimley leaned back with visible contempt. "Mrs. Hayes is seated at the head of the table." Mr. Ashe's tone did not alter. "Not the one I mean." The words struck the room cleanly. Zoe felt her pulse jump once in her throat. This was their arrangement, yes. This was the precise fiction she had purchased. But hearing it spoken in that register, without flourish, made the claim sound less like invention and more like record. Lenora's voice thinned by a degree. "You overstep, sir." Zoe turned to him because she had to keep control of the terms before Lenora found one procedural weakness and split the entire attempt apart. "Tell them what I told you in the schoolroom," she said. "Portsmouth, quiet ceremony, no public notice." For the first time he looked directly at her and held the look a heartbeat too long, as if weighing whether obedience would serve her or destroy her. Then he reached inside his coat, drew out a folded document, and placed it beside her plate, with the care of a man setting down evidence, not bluff. "No invention is necessary, Mrs. Hayes," he said. "This is the certificate from St. Jude's, signed 2 years ago when you married Captain Lucian Hart by legal proxy to prevent this very coercion." The candle flames seemed to narrow. Zoe did not move for an instant because movement would admit that she did not understand. Her hand found the paper almost of its own accord. The vellum was real, thick, official. The parish seal had been pressed hard enough to leave a raised ring she could feel with her thumb. Beneath the printed declarations stood 2 signatures she knew as intimately as her own breath. Her father's, angular and decisive, and hers, smaller, written on a slant she had abandoned last winter. She remembered the day with vicious clarity. Her father fevered in his bedchamber in March light, solicitors moving in and out with packet after packet. Her own hand cramped from signing powers, transfers, trust instructions, emergency protections for the fleet if he died before quarter's end. He had caught her wrist once, weak but urgent. "Sign what Mr. Bell provides, Zoe. All of it, no delays." She had signed because he asked. She had signed because he was dying. She had signed because there had been no room left in the world for hesitation. Lenora rose, chair legs scraping marble. "Give me that." Zoe stood at the same moment and lifted the document out of reach. "No." Brimley extended his hand, palm up, as if requesting a menu. "This is absurd. Proxy marriages of this type require specific authority and witness." Mr. Ashe looked at him without visible effort. "They do." "Then produce witness names." He did not glance at the page. "Thomas Bell, solicitor. Reverend Isaac Fenner of St. Jude's. Martha Keel as parish witness. Edwin Hart as family proxy." Brimley's mouth tightened. He had expected stalling. He had received particulars. Lenora's boredom had burned off. In its place stood something colder because it was active. "This document could be fabricated." "It could be verified," Mr. Ashe said. She turned to Hawthorne, who still stood at attention near the sideboard. "Send at once for Mr. Bell." Zoe spoke before Hawthorne could bow. "Do so, and send for the parish registry clerk as well." Lenora swung back to her daughter. "You will not issue orders in my house." "Then call it a request," Zoe said. "I do not mind the word." For one moment, mother and daughter faced each other across the linen and silver and years of managed compliance. Zoe's hands were steady now, though she could feel the blood pounding at her wrists. She did not cry. Something harder than tears had settled into shape inside her, clear and useful. Lenora sat first. "Very well, we verify." Brimley did not sit. "Lady Hayes, if this farce has any legal standing, our negotiations are suspended." "Our negotiations," Lenora said, each syllable clipped, "will proceed when facts are established." Mr. Ashe remained seated, back straight, hands quiet near his untouched soup. He had not reached for the certificate again. He had placed it and relinquished it, as if the point had never been possession, but timing. Hawthorne moved to the door and dispatched 2 footmen with sealed notes. Their departure thudded through the hall, rapid steps diminishing towards the mews. No one ate. The soup cooled. The fish course waited in the anteroom and was sent back to the kitchen untouched. After a long minute, Lenora spoke to Zoe without looking at her. "If this is a trick, you have ruined yourself." Zoe folded the certificate once and set it before her own plate. "If it is true, you no longer own my signature." Brimley gave a short laugh without humour. "And this Captain Hart, where is he now? At sea? Dead? Conveniently absent while impostors dine in his place?" Mr. Ashe answered before Zoe could. "Not absent." The word carried no heat. It carried certainty. From somewhere above, the long case clock in the upstairs corridor struck 8, each note descending through the house that had measured Zoe's life in rules and permissions. By the time the final chime faded, The dining room had become something else. Not a stage set for Lenora's arrangement, but a chamber waiting on record and law. Zoe sat with the certificate under her hand and felt the axis of the evening tilt, quietly, beyond recall. The clock's last note had scarcely faded when hurried steps sounded in the corridor, and Hawthorne returned with Mr. Bell still buttoning his coat over nightclothes hastily replaced by day wear, his silver hair unpowdered and his expression sharpened by annoyance that dissolved into alertness the instant he saw the certificate on the table. "Lady Hayes," he said with a curt bow, then to Zoe. Mrs. Hart, it seems." His eyes moved to Mr. Ashe and paused, measuring him in one long, legal glance. "And you are?" "Lucian Hart's representative," Mr. Ashe said. It was not a lie and not the full truth. Zoe heard the precision. Behind Mr. Bell came a younger man with ink-stained cuffs and a leather dispatch case held to his chest. Hawthorne announced him as Mr. Pike from St. Jude's Parish Registry. The dining room, which had been built for display, became a counting chamber. Candles were drawn closer. A writing slope was brought. Pens were laid out, sharpened and waiting. Mr. Bell requested the document first. Zoe gave it to him without relinquishing her posture. He inspected seal, paper, witness lines, then looked up at her over his spectacles. "Did your father place this among the March emergency packet?" "He did," Zoe said. "I signed what he asked me to sign." Lenora's fan was still closed in her hand, though the mother-of-pearl ribs had whitened where her fingers pressed. "Under duress of grief," she said coolly. "A daughter signing blindly in a sick room does not establish informed consent." "Mr." Bell did not look at Lenora as he answered. "Informed consent is established by signature witnessed and notarized if no coercion is proven. Grief is not coercion in law." Mr. Pike opened his case and drew out a bound registry book wrapped in cloth against damp. He found the entry with practiced speed, then turned it so all at table could see the narrow columns of names and dates. March 14th, 2 years prior. Zoe Hayes. Captain Lucian Hart. By proxy, Edwin Hart. Witnesses as spoken. Parish stamp. Brimley leaned forward, face hardening as each line matched the vellum in Bell's hand. "Proxy to an officer with no estate," he said. "A desperate measure." Mr. Bell corrected him in the dry tone of a man who preferred facts to rank. "Captain Hart held contingent rights in 3 coastal contracts at the time. Your lordship may call it desperate. I would call it prudent." Lenora's gaze did not leave the page. Then why was this concealed from me? Mr. Bell's pause was the smallest courtesy he could offer before refusing her. At Mr. Hayes's direct instruction, the packet was sealed with instructions for activation only upon attempted marriage coercion or removal of Miss Hayes from company governance. Silence settled, dense and efficient. Zoe felt the room alter by degrees. She could not measure, but could feel in her skin, as one feels tide shift under hull planks. For years, Lenora had controlled every door by owning sequence and timing. Tonight, sequence had moved outside her hand. Brimley stood, his chair skidded against marble. "Lady Hayes, I will not continue negotiations under this absurd fog of concealed contracts." Lenora rose as well, slower, smoother, each movement selected. "Then do not," she said. "Hawthorne will provide your cloak." He looked at Zoe once with a proprietary contempt now stripped of expectation. "You have made yourself unmanageable, Mrs. Hart." Zoe met his gaze without lifting her voice. At last, he left without another word. The dining room door closed behind him with a soft, expensive click. Mr. Bell requested signatures on a recognition statement. Mr. Pike copied the parish entry by hand, sanded the ink, and folded the sheet into his case. Hawthorne saw them out. Lenora did not dismiss Zoe. She did not dismiss Mr. Ashe. She remained standing at the head of the table, eyes on the extinguishing future she had arranged so carefully. "When this house wakes," she said at length, "it will wake to a new fiction. You will both behave as if this revelation was expected." Zoe answered first. "No fiction has altered, Mother. Only visibility." Lenora's gaze shifted to Mr. Ashe. "If you are to remain under this roof, you will keep my daughter from further theatrical gestures. I will not have scenes in front of guests." Mr. Ashe stood from his chair with the contained economy Zoe had noticed from the first landing. "My wife requires no correction." The sentence was level, almost mild, no challenge in volume, no flourish. Yet it landed with the finality of a locked ledger. Zoe did not look at him. She could not without showing too much. Warmth rose under her ribs anyway, small and sharp and unwelcome only because it mattered. No man in this house had ever refused Lenora in her hearing without first glancing at consequences. Lenora said nothing for 2 breaths, then turned to Hawthorne, who had just returned. "Prepare the east guest chamber for Mr. Ashe. Adjacent door to Mrs. Hart's sitting room remains bolted." "Already done, my lady," Hawthorne said. Of course it was. Even the butler had adjusted to the new geometry faster than speech could keep pace. When Lenora withdrew, black silk whispering against the corridor runner, Zoe remained by the table, one hand resting near the abandoned soup spoon, and the other on the folded certificate. Her pulse had begun to settle. Exhaustion arrived in its place, heavy and cold. Mr. Ashe waited until the door shut behind Lenora before speaking. "You should lock that document tonight. I have no key ring in this house that remains mine for long." He reached into his coat and set a small brass key beside her hand. "Upper drawer of the library atlas cabinet, false bottom. Bell used it for contingency papers under your father." Zoe stared at the key. "How do you know that?" "I asked the right clerk." Again, precise. Again, incomplete. She lifted her eyes to his face. In candlelight, the fatigue around his mouth became visible. So did the restraint with which he held himself slightly back, as if distance were a deliberate courtesy. "I paid you for one evening," she said. "You paid me to stand beside you. The duration was never defined." A dry answer, almost humour, gone as soon as it appeared. She took the key. "Very well, Mr. Ashe. We begin with breakfast at 8. If we are to satisfy appearances, you must learn how this table breathes." "I have been learning all night." He inclined his head and stepped back, leaving her space to move first. She gathered the certificate and walked toward the corridor without haste. At the turn near the portrait gallery, she realized he had matched his pace to hers without touching her once. By Thursday morning, the household had accepted that the title by Zoe's name had changed, even if nothing else had been permitted to do so. Hawthorne announced Mrs. Hart with impeccable neutrality. 2 maids curtsied lower than before and then pretended they always had. Lenora arrived at breakfast 10 minutes late, creating the delay that forced Zoe and Mr. Ashe to sit alone at first. The room smelled of toast and marmalade and damp wool drying near the service grate. Rain had come in at dawn, not hard, only steady. Zoe had brought her father's old freight abstracts with her and set them near her plate, a visible declaration she no longer intended to ask permission to read. Mr. Ashe took black tea, no sugar. His hands were scarred across the knuckles, older marks turned pale. He did not reach for her papers, did not ask what she intended at the quarterly meeting, did not perform familiarity for passing servants. He simply moved the jam dish within her reach when the footman set it too far and returned to his cup. The gesture was small enough to dismiss. She did not dismiss it. When Lenora entered, she glanced at the abstracts and then at Zoe. Company papers do not belong at breakfast. They belong where work is done, Zoe said. Lenora's gaze slid to Mr. Ashe, expecting alliance. You will instruct your wife in household order. He set down his cup. Mrs. Hart and I will determine our own order. Lenora ate half a slice of toast and spoke no further for the rest of the meal. That evening, at a card gathering Lenora could not cancel without announcing weakness, Zoe and Mr. Ashe entered together through the front drawing room while 3 neighbouring families watched from gilt chairs and pretended not to watch. Candles threw warm light over satin and polished shoes, over mouths curved in social approval and eyes bright with hunger for scandal. Lady Penford, who had once told Zoe with kind cruelty that spinsterhood could be dignified if managed quietly, greeted her with a fluttering smile. Mrs. Hart, what an unexpected delight. We had heard only the faintest whisper. Whispers travel faster than post, Zoe said. Mr. Ashe inclined his head to Lady Penford and offered no further fuel. Through 2 rounds of whist and 1 of loo, he spoke only when required, yet he tracked every card on the table with a precision Zoe had seen in dock clerks, balancing cargo manifests. When Colonel Denton attempted a jocular remark about sailors and marriage contracts, Mr. Ashe answered with 1 measured sentence about convoy losses in winter seas, and the Colonel fell silent as if corrected by weather itself. On the walk back through the corridor, Zoe said softly, You do not gamble like a man short of money. He glanced at her once. I do not gamble when odds are poor. Yet you agreed to mine. A pause, then. Your odds improved. She felt absurdly the edge of a smile and let it pass before it could be seen. 3 days later, Lenora ordered Zoe to inspect the East India warehouse accounts before noon, a task previously withheld on the theory that numbers fatigued delicate minds. A carriage was called. Zoe expected to go with Hawthorne and a clerk. Instead, Lenora said from the hall, Take your husband. Let him witness what he has purchased. Zoe stepped into the carriage first. Mr. Ashe followed, knees braced against the opposite seat as the wheels caught the ruts of Cheapside. Outside, rain had lifted, leaving streets bright with mud and horse steam. She opened the dispatch wallet on her lap and withdrew a tariff schedule. If Brimley moves his bonded goods through Kent under revised Admiralty rates, he can bury debt in transit insurance adjustments. Mr. Ashe looked at the page once and tapped the 3rd column with 1 finger. Not under last quarter's revision. Military wool consignments were reclassified. He would need false declarations at 2 ports. Zoe looked up sharply. That revision was circulated only to contracted officers and major carriers. He met her gaze without blinking. Then your father's company should have received it. We did not. Then someone intercepted it. The carriage rocked hard over a stone, throwing light across his face. He had shaved that morning, and without stubble he looked less like a man found in an arcade and more like a man accustomed to issuing orders where delay cost lives. She watched his profile for 1 beat too long and returned to her papers. At the docks, the foreman greeted Zoe with cautious deference that warmed when she asked for names instead of totals. 2 retired dockmen stood by the rope house gate, hired now for ledger sorting because their knees no longer trusted ladders. When Mr. Ashe stepped down from the carriage behind her, both men straightened with reflexive speed, one of them beginning, "Cap," before swallowing the rest into a cough. Zoe heard it. She did not turn her head. In the counting office, she reviewed manifests while Mr. Ashe stood near the window, speaking quietly with the weighmaster about damaged casks and insurance language, precise enough to make the clerk abandon pretense and fetch the true book, not the public copy. No title had been offered. Obedience arrived anyway. By the first week of October, shared evenings in the library had become routine. The household could no longer stage manage out of existence. Zoe worked at her father's old desk with 2 lamps lit low and ledgers open in ranked stacks. Mr. Ash sat opposite with correspondence bundles, separating freight claims from pension disbursements, flagging discrepancies with narrow slips of blue paper that appeared from nowhere and multiplied with unnerving accuracy. Some nights they exchanged only 6 sentences in 3 hours. Some nights Lenora sent for Zoe twice, and she answered once. The room smelled of leather, lamp oil, and the faint salt that clung to his coat no matter how often it was brushed. Near midnight on the 7th evening, Zoe reached for the Atlas cabinet key at her throat and found the chain twisted. Her fingers, ink-stained and tired, fumbled against the clasp. Mr. Ash stood, crossed the space between them, and stopped at arm's length. "May I?" She gave one nod. He did not touch her skin. He lifted the chain by its edge, turned the clasp free, and stepped back at once. The certificate key settled against her wrist with a soft click. Such restraint should have felt formal. It felt careful. She locked the day's copied pages beneath the false bottom and returned to the desk. On the top sheet lay a pension ledger entry amended in a hand she recognized as Lenora's. Reallocated funds, no beneficiary signature, transferred to a Brimley holding account. Zoe looked up. This line should not exist. Mr. Ash's eyes were on the same page, hard and intent. "No," he said. "It should not." Outside the library door, footsteps paused, then moved on. Inside, the 2 of them sat in lamplight over a line of ink that had begun to explain far more than either had yet said aloud. Outside the library door, footsteps paused again, then continued toward the front stair, measured and light, the tread of a maid carrying empty glasses from Lenora's sitting room. Zoe kept her eyes on the amended pension line until the ink blurred at its edges. Transfer to Brimley Holdings, no beneficiary signature, initialed in her mother's hand. Not error, decision. She drew a fresh sheet toward her and copied the line exactly, including blot placement and margin mark, then sanded it and set it aside to dry. "If this entry stands in 1 book only, it is concealment," she said. "If it stands in 3, it is policy." Mr. Ash looked across the desk at her, not at the papers. "Then we find the other 2 books. Tonight, it is near 1. Tonight." He gave one brief nod. "The pension vouchers are held in the lower counting room, key kept by Mr. Tenby. Tenby no longer has keys after supper. Lenora changed that system in June." His brow shifted by a fraction. "Who holds them now?" "She does, or Hawthorne under seal." Zoe rose, gathered the copied page, and crossed to the Atlas cabinet. The brass key at her throat clicked against the lock. She lifted the false bottom, placed the page beneath, and paused with her hand on the hidden compartment's edge. "There are 3 men she dismissed last month from pensions review. She said they were slow." "Were they?" "They were precise." Mr. Ash stood as she closed the panel. "Names?" "Elias Tyndall, Martin Rourke, Peter Vale." At the second name, something near his jaw tightened and vanished. "Rourke. You know him." "I know of him." The answer was clean and controlled, but no one says know of with that kind of care unless history sits behind it. Zoe slid the key back beneath her collar. "He served with Captain Hart?" "Yes." She waited. He offered nothing further, and the silence between them did not feel evasive, so much as guarded by old discipline. The library lamp hissed softly in the draught. At last she gathered the remaining ledgers into ordered stacks. "Lenora will have moved whatever can be moved once the house wakes. We need copies of pension disbursements prior to June. Tyndall keeps private abstracts in his rooms over the Cooper's Lane, if she has not seized those as well. Then we go at dawn. She looked up at him. You said 1 o'clock as if it were argument. I said it as warning. Accepted. His mouth shifted, not quite a smile. Very well, Mrs. Hart. At dawn, the rain had thinned to mist that silvered carriage roofs and left the courtyard cobbles slick. Zoe took tea standing in her dressing room, refused breakfast, and chose the plainest walking dress she owned, brown wool with cuffs gone soft from use. She pinned up her hair without maid's help and slipped 2 account books into a satchel built for sheet music. On the writing table lay Lenora's birthday gift from last season, a rope of pale pearls with a clasp of seed diamonds, chosen to signal filial elegance and obedience at once. Zoe lifted them, weighed them once in her palm, and set them beside the satchel rather than back in the case. When she entered the lower hall, Mr. Ash waited near the service door in a dark coat still shiny at the elbows, but brushed spotless. Hawthorne handed him gloves and handed Zoe nothing. Lady Hayes has ordered the carriage to remain for afternoon calls, Hawthorne said. No morning conveyance is available. We will walk, Zoe replied. Hawthorne's expression did not shift. As you wish, Mrs. Hart. They crossed 2 streets in damp wind and turned into Cooper's Lane, where the air smelled of oak shavings and tar. Tyndall's room sat above a chandlery, reached by an outside stair with 1 broken rail tied in place by rope. Zoe knocked once. The door opened almost at once, revealing a thin man with yellowed cuffs, iron-grey whiskers, and eyes gone wary from being discarded too often. Mrs. Hart, he said, uncertain over the name. I had not expected— You weren't meant to, Zoe said. May we come in, Mr. Tyndall? The room was narrow and neat, with ledgers stacked by year along one wall and a kettle blackening on a small grate. Mr. Ash remained by the door, while Zoe sat at the table and asked for pension abstracts from April through September. Tyndall hesitated only until she placed 2 sovereigns on the wood. For your time, she said. His gaze lifted to hers. My lady, I am not permitted to release company documents without board order. Then do not release them. Read them to me while I copy. He looked at the coins, then at the man by the door, then back to Zoe. Lady Hayes dismissed me for refusing 1 transfer. Which transfer? Widow's Pension Reserve, 4th quarter pre-allocation, routed through Brimley warehousing. I declined to countersign. She called me obsolete. Zoe opened her satchel and drew out paper. Read, please. For 2 hours she copied under Tyndall's dictation while mist turned to light rain and back again, beyond the warped glass. Mr. Ash spoke only to ask for exact voucher numbers when a figure seemed transposed. Tyndall answered him with involuntary deference, as if he were reporting to an officer whose authority had never required introduction. When they finished, Zoe stacked the copies, dried them and tied them with green ribbon. I am restoring you to temporary review status, she said. 10 shillings a week until formal vote. Tyndall stared at her. You cannot do that alone. I can pay for labour from my personal account. Lady Hayes will void it. Not if the work is already done and witnessed. Zoe rose. Begin tomorrow at 9 in the East Counting Room. Bring your original abstracts. He swallowed once and bowed, old habit meeting new risk. Yes, Mrs. Hart. On the stair down, Mr. Ash said quietly, You are spending money she can track. I'm aware. She will retaliate. Yes. He said nothing more, but when they reached the street, he shifted his position to the outer side of the pavement, taking the splash from passing wheels along his coat hem without remark. Grey weather settled over the city in a damp, unbroken sheet, wool never quite drying, and shop windows gathering breath fog before noon. Zoe crossed to Wren Passage with the pearl rope wrapped in muslin inside her glove box and told Mr. Ashe she required half an hour alone. "I will wait at the corner," he said. "I did not ask you to wait." "Understood." He stepped back under an awning near a stationer's and turned his attention outward, giving her privacy without withdrawal. She entered Pollard and Sons, jewellers and assayers, where brass lamps warmed mahogany cases, and a clerk with ink-black hair assessed her clothing before her face. "I have an item for immediate sale," Zoe said. He brought out a velvet tray. She unwrapped the pearls, and even in that controlled light they held a soft luster that made them seem less like ornament than verdict. The clerk inspected clasp, counted stones, consulted a ledger, and named a sum lower than insult, higher than charity. "They were a gift," Zoe said evenly. "You will not imply provenance issues to reduce value. Offer proper market." The clerk recalculated and improved the figure. She accepted, signed without hesitation, and took notes rather than coin. "Draw one payment to Dr. Samuel Ives' orthopedic surgery account for Martin Rourke. Draw the second to Mrs. Eliza Rourke. Apprenticeship fee to Havisham Millinery, first-year term. Mark both private disbursement." The clerk looked up. "Relationship to beneficiaries?" "None that concerns your ledger." He dipped his pen. "Yes, madam." She requested receipts, watched him stamp each with the shop seal, then folded them into her satchel beside the pension copies. Cost counted in pearls, in future inquiries, in Lenora's inevitable displeasure when she noticed an empty case. Cost accepted. Outside, rain spattered harder. "Mister." Ashe turned as she approached, gaze dropping briefly to the muslin in her hand and then to her face. "You concluded quickly," he said. "I dislike bargaining over sentiment." His eyes were very clear in the rain-dim light. "What did you sell?" "An unnecessary necklace." "For what purpose?" "A necessary one." He held her gaze for a moment, then inclined his head as though acknowledging terms in a treaty. "Where next?" "St. Bartholomew's Lane." Rourke lodged above a cooperage near the hospital annex, in rooms that smelled of liniment, damp plaster, and boiled onions from a neighbouring kitchen. He sat by the window with his right hand wrapped in clean bandage, fingers stiff and bent where old crush injury had healed badly. His daughter, Anne, no more than 17, stood behind him with a mending basket and the expression of someone who had learned to expect refusal before asking. When Zoe entered, Rourke made an awkward attempt to rise. "Mister." Ashe moved first and put a steadying hand to his shoulder. "Stay seated." Rourke froze, looked up into his face, and for one exposed instant, the years dropped away. "Sir," he said softly. Mr. Ashe answered in the same tone. "Rourke." No titles, no explanations. Recognition enough. Zoe set her glove box on the table and opened it to show the physician's note and millinery contract she had just purchased. "Mr. Rourke, your surgery is paid. Dr. Ives expects you Thursday. Miss Rourke, your apprenticeship begins Monday if you still want it." Anne stared at the papers, then at Zoe, then at her father, as if one of them must correct the statement. Rourke swallowed, his good hand tightening on the arm of his chair. "Mrs. Hart, I have no means to repay this. I did not offer it as a loan. Lady Hayes dismissed me for insubordination. She dismissed you for refusing an unlawful transfer." His gaze flicked once toward Mr. Ashe, then back. "There are consequences for helping me. There are consequences for not helping you." Zoe turned to Anne. "Do you wish the apprenticeship?" "Yes, ma'am," the girl whispered, then louder, "Yes." "Then go. Learn a trade no one can confiscate." Anne's mouth trembled once before she steadied it. She curtsied with clumsy urgency and took the contract as if afraid the paper might vanish. Zoe laid the surgeon receipt on the table before Rourke. "Keep this dry. Bring your discharge summary to the East counting room when you return. I am rehiring review staff on temporary wages." His eyes shone but did not spill. "You are your father's daughter." She closed the glove box. "I am trying to be." She was at the door when he said, rough with effort, "He used to ask after your arithmetic at sea. Captain Hart said you corrected freight tonnage in your head faster than quartermasters with slates." Zoe stopped. The corridor seemed to narrow around the words. She did not look at Mr. Ash. Did he? Every letter. She gave one nod and continued down the stair. Neither of them spoke until they reached the broader street where carts rattled over wet stones, and a fishwife argued prices with a cook's maid. Then Mr. Ash said, "You sold the pearls for them." She kept her eyes ahead. "For surgery and apprenticeship. Yes. Those pearls were worth social armor in this city. Armor that belongs to my mother is not armor." He walked in silence for several paces. "You did not know I could have covered those costs. I did not do it to display virtue before you. I see that." His voice had gone quieter, stripped of its usual formal edge. She glanced at him and saw, for the first time since Fleet Market, emotion unguarded in his face, not dramatic, simply present and unmistakable. Respect, yes. Something warmer beneath it that she could not yet name without danger. That night, Hayes' house tightened around the coming shareholder assembly like wire drawn through a ring. Invitations arrived, then revised attendance lists, then legal notices under seal. Lenora spoke to Zoe only in the presence of staff and used the title Mrs. Hart, as if it were an accounting error she intended to correct. Mr. Ash spent long hours in the West study with Mr. Bell and a narrow-shouldered legal clerk named Finch, reviewing affidavits and cargo schedules behind walnut doors that had too often carried words Zoe was not meant to hear. On the morning itself, Zoe descended early with her satchel of copied ledgers, the pension abstracts, Tyndall's sworn statement, and the jeweller's receipts she had no intention of submitting unless challenged. The hall smelled of beeswax and wet wool. Outside, carriage wheels hissed on the damp drive. Hawthorne informed her that Mr. Bell had arrived and that Mr. Ash had requested 10 minutes with counsel before the board convened. She nodded and moved toward the rear corridor that led to the anteroom outside the West study. Her steps slowed when she heard voices through the walnut panel. One of them Mr. Finch's, brisk with professional anxiety. "If Lady Hayes contests motive, sir, she will claim domestic grievance and manufactured evidence. The marriage itself may be construed as leverage." Mr. Ash answered in the measured register he used when every word had weight. "The marriage gave me standing. The evidence matters more than sentiment." The banister rail was cool under Zoe's fingers. For a second she did not feel her hand at all, only the clean strike of the sentence. How easily he had separated instrument from feeling, contract from person. She had known, intellectually, that he moved through this house with purpose beyond her private survival. She had known he asked precise questions because he was building a case. Knowing and hearing were different countries. Inside the study, Finch said something she did not catch, papers rustling over wood. "Mr." Ash replied. "Lower. We proceed as planned." Zoe stepped back from the door before the next line reached her. Her pulse was suddenly loud, then distant. She adjusted the satchel strap over her shoulder and found her fingers cold despite the warm corridor air. When Hawthorne appeared at the far end with a tray of sealed envelopes, she spoke first, and her voice came level. "Mr. Bell may tell the board I will be present in 5 minutes." "Yes, Mrs. Hart." She turned toward the assembly room, every movement exact, the copied ledgers pressing against her side like another spine. Something hard and bright had formed beneath the ache, not rage, not collapse. Usefulness. She walked the length of the corridor without once breaking stride. She turned toward the assembly room, then stopped at the intersection where the front corridor met the private stair. Voices carried from below, male and formal, chairs being moved across polished floorboards, the distinct rattle of a document box set too hard on a table. In 5 minutes they would begin, without her, with her mother's version already seated at the head of the room. Zoe pivoted and took the private stair 2 flights up. Her dressing room was cold, the grate long gone to ash. Morning light pressed through thin cloud and turned the mirror to dull pewter. She crossed to the wardrobe, pulled down the small travelling case she had once used for music copies, and set it open on the bed. One dark dress, a wool petticoat, stockings, ledger pencil roll, her father's folding rule, the brass key on its chain. She moved without haste and without pause, each item chosen for use rather than comfort. On the writing table lay her gloves, the empty pearl case, and a sealed note from Lenora that had arrived before dawn and remained unopened. Zoe slid the note beneath the blotter and left it there. A knock sounded at the half-open door. Her maid, Nell, hovered on the threshold with her hands clasped in her apron. "Mrs. Hart, Lady Hayes asked whether you required assistance with your hair before the meeting." Zoe closed the case and fastened the clasp. "No, thank you, Nell." Nell looked at the bag, then at Zoe's face. "Shall I send it down to the carriage room?" "There will be no carriage for me." A brief swallow. "Yes, ma'am." Nell did not ask where Zoe intended to go. In this house, questions had always been a form of danger. Zoe lifted the case herself and stepped into the corridor. As she passed, Nell shifted aside and very quietly said, "I put fresh ink in your travel well this morning." Zoe paused long enough to meet her eyes. "You are kind." She carried the case downstairs by the back stair and placed it behind the cloak chest near the side entrance, where outgoing parcels waited for collection. Not hidden, not displayed. Ready. The cost of that single bag settled over her like a second cloak. If the board rejected her evidence, she would leave this house before nightfall with no settlement, no social cover, and no guarantee that any firm would employ a woman who had publicly accused her mother of fraud. The thought did not frighten her as much as it should have. It clarified. By the time she returned to the lower corridor, the second bell had rung for the shareholders' assembly. The boardroom had once been her father's receiving chamber, high-ceilinged and spare, with maps of shipping lanes framed between the windows, and a long walnut table scored by decades of pen points. She had been allowed to pour tea there as a girl. She had never been allowed to sit. Today, every chair was occupied except one near the end. Mr. Bell sat with his papers arranged in legal ranks. Mr. Finch stood behind him with 2 dispatch cases and ink on his cuff. 3 senior shareholders from the river districts watched the door with expressions that blended curiosity and impatience. At the far side, Lord Brimley had returned, pale with contained anger, his gloved hand resting on the back of Lenora's chair, as if alliance could still be mistaken for strength. Lenora looked up first. Her voice arrived smooth and cool. "You are late." Zoe set her satchel on the table and remained standing. "Begin without preface." Lenora gave a small, incredulous laugh. "This is not your chamber to command." Zoe untied the green ribbon around her copied ledgers and spread the first bundle before the nearest shareholder. "Read page 42 first." The words landed flat and exact. She could feel the room lean towards the paper. Mr. Dalrymple, oldest of the board and vain about his eyesight, adjusted his spectacles, and turned to the marked page. His brows drew together. He looked once to Lenora, once back to the line item, then reached for the second copy Zoe placed beside him. "Widow's Pension Reserve Transfer," he said slowly. "Brimley Holdings. No beneficiary notation." Lenora did not turn her head. "A temporary allocation pending correction." "Then where is the correction?" Zoe asked. Brimley answered instead, "Mrs. Hart, your domestic grievances do not grant you audit authority." She drew out Tyndall's sworn abstract and laid it beside the ledger. "Ilias Tyndall's original entries from April to September, dictated in my presence, witnessed by Mr. Ashe." "Mr. Ashe is your hired actor," Brimley said. "He witnessed what he was paid to witness." "I witnessed it as well," said Mr. Bell before Zoe could answer. "And I verified voucher numbers against parish pension petitions this morning." A murmur moved along the table. Lenora lifted one hand and the room quieted by habit. "We have spent enough time indulging theatrics," she said. "The board may note my daughter's instability and proceed to routine agenda." Zoe felt the old training tug at her throat, the command to apologize, to soften, to take the offered smaller chair and call survival a victory. She did not sit down. She opened her satchel again and placed 2 stamped receipts on the table, turning them so each seal could be read. "Martin Rourke's surgical account and Anne Rourke's apprenticeship fee, paid privately after his dismissal for refusing the pension transfer. I submit these not as charity, but as corroboration that staff were removed when they would not countersign." Lenora's gaze sharpened. "You sold family property?" "Yes, for a dismissed clerk." "For proof that he existed beyond your convenience." For the first time, something like anger moved under Lenora's composure. "You mistake sentiment for governance." "No," Zoe said, "I mistook silence for duty." The door opened behind her. She did not turn immediately. She knew the rhythm of those steps now, measured, controlled, never hurried in public rooms. Mr. Ashe entered with Mr. Finch half a pace behind and came to stand at Zoe's right shoulder, not touching her, not claiming ground she had not taken herself. Mr. Finch addressed the table. "Additional exhibits are prepared, gentlemen, including dockside declarations and revised Admiralty tariff notices intercepted before company circulation." Lenora looked from Finch to Ashe. "On whose authority are these being introduced?" "Mr." Ashe removed a signet ring from his finger, the plain one he had worn since Fleet Market, and set it on the table beside the ledgers. Beneath it, in the polished wood's reflection, Zoe saw the imprint she had never questioned. Not common brass, but a covered crest. His voice was quiet. "Mine." He drew a folded commission from inside his coat and handed it to Mr. Dalrymple, who broke the seal with visible reluctance and then read the first lines twice. Colour shifted in his face. "State your name for the record," Dalrymple said. Mr. Ashe answered without emphasis. "I am Captain Lucian Hart, Earl of Calder, Mrs. Hart's lawful husband, and the Crown investigator assigned to this fraud." For a moment, no one moved. The words did not strike like thunder. They settled, and in settling they rearranged the whole room. Zoe felt her own breath catch once and steady. Lucian Hart, Earl of Calder. The man in the worn coat, the man who knew where hidden keys lay, the man Dockman nearly saluted, the man who had said the marriage gave him standing. The pieces did not collide. They aligned. Brimley stood abruptly. "This is manufactured. A title does not sanctify entrapment." Lucien turned his head toward him. "No, evidence does." He placed the original marriage certificate beside Zoe's copies. Vellum, seal, signatures, her father's hand, her own, no invention, no escape from what had always been true and strategically hidden. Lenora remained seated, but her fingers tightened over the chair arm until the knuckles blanched. If you were investigating, you compromised your office by entering my household under disguise. Lucian's reply was as spare as ever. Your household did not disclose material records under direct request. Concealment justified covert entry under warrant. Mr. Bell slid a second document toward Dalrymple. Warrant included, executed 6 weeks prior. The shareholders began speaking at once, overlapping questions about diverted reserves, falsified transfer dates, and Brimley's debt exposure. Finch moved through the noise with efficient precision, distributing copies, collecting signatures on a motion sheet, noting objections in shorthand. Hawthorne appeared at the door as if summoned by the change in air itself, took in the scene, and withdrew to send for the magistrate already waiting in the front study. Zoe did not sit. Her hand rested on the edge of the table near the certificate, ink stains still dark along the side of her index finger. Across from her, Lenora's gaze lifted and met hers, not with remorse, never that, but with the cold appraisal of a strategist recalculating from loss. You have ruined your own name to win this room, Lenora said. Zoe answered in 4 words. I kept my own. Dalrymple rose with visible effort and read from the motion sheet, voice uneven but clear. Temporary suspension of Lenora Hayes's signing authority pending full audit. Immediate freeze on pension reallocations. Submission of all contested records to magistrate review under seal. 2 men voted no. 5 voted yes. Brimley objected on procedural grounds and was overruled by the clerk when no equity stake under his own name could be produced. As the board stamped and signed, the room's noise thinned into the scratch of nibs and the soft thud of wax seals pressed into place. Outside, carriage wheels passed on wet stones. Inside, decades of unchallenged control cracked by paperwork. The magistrate entered before noon, accepted the sealed packet from Bell, and requested Lenora's statement in the adjoining chamber. She stood at last, black silk immaculate as ever, and gave Zoe one final look that promised future campaigns if any ground remained to fight from. Then she left between Bell and the magistrate, spine unbent. Brimley followed without waiting for dismissal. Silence came down gradually after the door shut. Finch gathered used blotting papers. Dalrymple rubbed his eyes and asked for tea in a voice suddenly older. One by one, the shareholders drifted toward the corridor, each pausing near Lucien with a bow that had not existed an hour earlier. Zoe remained where she was until the room had nearly emptied. The satchel lay open, lighter now that its contents sat in official hands. At the edge of the table, Lucien's signet ring still glinted beside the marriage certificate. She looked at him at last. You might have told me sooner. He held her gaze, grey eyes steady, stripped of disguise now, but not of restraint. Sooner would have put you in greater danger. That was not your decision to make. No, he said. It was mine to regret. The admission was quiet and unadorned. It reached her more deeply than argument would have. In the corridor, someone called for Hawthorne. A door closed upstairs. Life in the house had resumed its practical sounds, but nothing in it was arranged as it had been that morning. Zoe lifted the certificate, folded it once, and placed it back into her satchel beside the now empty ribbon. When she straightened, Lucien stepped back half a pace to give her the passage first. She took it. She took it, crossed the corridor, and did not slow until she reached the side entrance where parcels waited in wicker hampers beneath the cloak chest. Her travelling case was still where she had left it, handle turned toward the door, ready for departure. For a long moment she looked at it without touching it. Then she set her satchel on the floor, opened the case, and began removing what she had packed in haste that morning. The dark dress, folded along old seam lines, the wool petticoat, the pencil roll, her father's folding rule. She placed each piece back into the house she had expected to abandon. Last came the brass key on its chain. She lifted it from her throat and slid it into the satchel pocket that held the marriage certificate. Behind her, footsteps stopped at a respectful distance. "You are unpacking," Lucienne said. She closed the case and turned. "I am reclaiming luggage." His coat was still damp at the hem from the walk to the assembly room, his expression controlled as ever, yet the mask of Mr. Ashe had dropped for good. Not gentler, clearer. "I did not know whether you meant to leave this house tonight," he said. "I did not know either." She lifted the empty case and set it on the cloak chest. "Now I do." He inclined his head once, accepting the answer without claiming it. A maid appeared at the corridor bend, curtsied, and held out a sealed envelope on a tray. "From Lady Hayes's writing table, Mrs. Hart. It was found beneath your blotter." Zoe recognized the hand before she broke the seal. Lenora's script was spare and exact. "Mrs. Hart, until formal inquiry concludes, I will reside at the Grosvenor Square townhouse under advisement. Household accounts remain solvent if no further sentimental disbursements occur. You may keep the East offices. Do not mistake temporary majority for permanence. No apology, no denial. Still, Lenora." Zoe folded the note and handed it back to the maid. "Please have this copied and filed with board correspondence." "Yes, Mrs. Hart." When the maid withdrew, Lucienne said, "You are submitting her warning as record." "I am submitting her handwriting as evidence of continuing intent." A brief pause, then the corner of his mouth shifted. "Prudent." She picked up her satchel. "Mr. Dalrymple requested that I return to the boardroom when the magistrate finished with his preliminary seal. Will you come?" "If you wish it." "I do." The boardroom smelled of sealing wax and cold tea when they re-entered. Rainlight had flattened against the tall windows, turning the lane maps on the walls to muted blue and brown. 5 shareholders remained, along with Bell, Finch, and Hawthorne near the side table with fresh ledgers. The chair at the head of the table stood empty. For years that empty chair had meant Lenora even in her absence. Today it meant decision. Dalrymple rose halfway as Zoe entered. "Mrs. Hart." We waited. She set her satchel down and took her place standing, not at the end where she had always been made ornamental, but midway down the right side where voting papers were stacked. "Proceed." Dalrymple cleared his throat. "Emergency agenda item. Interim managing partner pending full inquiry. Lady Hayes's authority is frozen. Routine operations require signature." One of the River shareholders, Mr. Pritchard, glanced toward Lucienne before addressing Zoe. "With respect, madam, this is a cargo company, not a drawing room. Can you execute under pressure?" Before she could answer, Hawthorne stepped forward from the sideboard, face composed. "Mrs. Hart has been correcting shipment tallies and pension errors in this house for years, sir. Most of us simply followed the wrong signature line." Pritchard blinked, then gave a short nod. "Noted." Dalrymple placed a ledger before Zoe and turned it so the signature page faced her. "If elected, you sign first transfer authority, then payroll release, then dock insurance renewals by noon tomorrow." Zoe looked down at the columns, then up at the men who had not seen her when she entered rooms until this morning. "I will sign payroll first," she said. "Then pension restoration. Insurance can wait 2 hours." Finch, who had been sorting affidavits with swift, careful hands, spoke without lifting his head. "That order is defensible under fiduciary duty." Dalrymple called the vote. This time no one voted no. When he announced the result, the room did not erupt. It settled, chairs creaked, pens were uncapped. Work resumed around a new centre as if it had always been possible. Dalrymple gestured toward the head of the table. "Mrs. Hart, your seat." Zoe crossed the room and sat where she had once poured tea. The walnut arm was smooth beneath her palm from her father's years of use. She signed payroll release first, then pension restoration in full, including immediate reinstatement for Elias Tyndall and temporary wage authorization for Martin Rourke upon medical clearance. She added a line requiring dual audit on all transfers to Brimley-linked accounts and handed the page to Bell. "Submit to magistrate's office before dusk," she said. Bell nodded. "It will be done." She took the jeweller's stamped receipts from her satchel and placed them beside the pension file. Private disbursements tied to corroborating witnesses, not company expenditures. Enter them as ancillary evidence only. Finch accepted them. Logged. She withdrew the brass key from her satchel pocket and set it on the table between herself and Bell. Atlas Cabinet False Bottom is no longer a private contingency. Have the hidden compartment inventoried in your presence, Mr. Bell, and in mine, before evening lock. Bell gave her a long, respectful look. "Yes, Mrs. Hart." She removed one final item, the marriage certificate. The vellum had warmed from being carried against the papers all morning. She rested it flat beside the transfer ledger, where every witness in the room could see the seal and signatures, and stop pretending uncertainty. No one challenged it. 3 days passed before Dr. Ives' note arrived by hand at the East Office. Surgery completed, prognosis favourable, work restrictions for 12 weeks. Zoe read it at the same desk where she had once been forbidden to sit, and sent Nell with a reply and a week's wage envelope addressed to Mrs. Rourke, as promised. Before noon, Anne Rourke appeared in a borrowed cloak, cheeks pink from cold and nerves, to present her apprenticeship indenture stamped by Havisham Millinery. Zoe checked the seal, copied the number into the personnel book, and wrote one line beneath it in her own hand. Trade secured. No family debt attached. By the second Thursday of October, Tyndall had resumed pension review at the East Counting Room, spectacles low on his nose, muttering voucher numbers while Finch built the formal case files. Rourke came in with his hand newly splintered and his posture cautious but upright. He signed his reinstatement with slow concentration, then stood at attention before Zoe's desk out of old instinct. She rose before he could bow. "Not in this office," she said quietly. "We stand as staff." His expression altered, pride and relief crossing at once. "Yes, ma'am." Hawthorne entered that afternoon with the key rings Lenora had once distributed to keep power fragmented. Household silver, correspondence chest, archive drawers, carriage ledgers. He laid them on the blotter and recited each lock by memory. At the end he hesitated just once. "I should have spoken earlier," he said, "when your letters were opened." Zoe held his gaze. "You are speaking now." "If you retain me, Mrs. Hart, no letter addressed to you will be opened without your written order." "Put that in house policy," she said. "Signed by both of us." His chin dipped. At once. The loaded glances that had once followed her through dining rooms resolved into practical allegiances, or disappeared. The dockman, who had swallowed cap, now addressed Lucien as "my lord" in public and "sir" at the key, and never again pretended surprise. Lady Penford sent a basket and a note full of careful congratulations that said much and admitted nothing. Zoe read it, smiled once at the social acrobatics, and filed it unanswered. Lord Brimley submitted a formal denial through counsel, was contradicted by his own debt ledgers under seal, and ceased calling at Hayes House. Lenora did not return. Her statement to the magistrate remained cold, technical, and self-protective, exactly as expected. She contested intent, not handwriting. The inquiry took her titles in business and left her social invitations intact, which was how London preferred its justice: documented and polite. On the evening the first full audit closed, the house had gone quiet by 10. Rain ticked softly against the library glass. Zoe remained in the boardroom alone, adding her final initials to the pension restoration register while lamp smoke braided upward in thin blue threads. Her fingers were ink-stained again. Her shoulders ached. She felt more alive than she had in years. A knock sounded. Then Lucian entered without ceremony, carrying 2 cups of tea. He set one near her hand and took the chair opposite, the same place where Mr. Ash had once sorted claims with blue slips of paper. "The last packet was delivered to the magistrate at 9, he said. "Bell sent receipt." She nodded toward the dispatch tray. "Filed. Every copied ledger is now in official record. The hidden compartment inventory is complete. The key stays with the office ring." "And the travelling case?" "Unpacked." He looked at her for a long moment, then reached into his coat and placed his signet ring on the table beside her cup. Not offered, not imposed. Present. "I can petition for immediate dissolution," he said. "Given the proxy origin and concealment, the court would likely grant it. Your position in the company would remain protected by this week's vote." She sat very still. The rain kept time on the window. "That is the honourable exit," he added, "if you want it." She met his eyes, grey, steady, no disguise left between them. "And what do you want, Lucien?" The name seemed to land between them like a door opening. He answered in the plain voice he used when he refused pretense. "I want the marriage we have not yet had. Chosen, not deployed, equal in law, equal at table, equal in risk. No flourish, no pressure, a single decisive truth." Zoe placed her hand over the marriage certificate, then over the signet ring, ink and vellum and metal under her palm. She felt the weight of her father's signature, her own unknowing one, the weeks of evidence and restraint and watched kindness that had brought them to this quiet room. "Yes," she said, "if we build it as equals." He exhaled once, almost soundless, and something in his face eased that she had never seen eased before. "Then we begin with terms," he said. "We begin with practice," she replied. A slow smile transformed him. Not softer, exactly, but open. "As you wish, Mrs. Hart." She rose, gathered the certificate, and placed it in the top drawer of her desk, beside the company seal. Not hidden now, not weaponized, simply part of the record she had chosen. When she straightened, he stood as well. They extinguished the lamps together, one by one, and left the boardroom side by side. In the hall outside, Hawthorne waited to lock up. He looked from Zoe to Lucian, then bowed with unforced precision. "Good night, Mrs. Hart," he said. "Good night, my lord." "Good night, Hawthorne," Zoe answered, and took the keys from his hand herself.